And there's magic? No. There it is. Okay. Yay, technology. Wow, what a full room. This is so great. I love the people that like still sit by the door even though the session's only 20 minutes long. They're like, maybe if it's not that good, I can catch 10 minutes of the other session. You know, I'm watching you people. Not gonna lie. So my name is Deanna Zant. That's where you can find me. I'm Random Deanna on Twitter. And also if you're live tweeting this, obviously the hashtag for the conference is W2E. And then the other hashtag I chose was just an acronym for Free for All Web, which is FFAW. So, get started here. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a media technologist. I work in Brooklyn. I'm originally from upstate New York, and I just wrote a book that came out this summer. It's called Share This! How You Will Change the World with Social Networking. And how I spend my non-author time is I help a lot of media and advocacy organizations figure out what they should be doing online. So that's kind of how I ended up here today. And this is actually a section of my book that I really wanted to dive into within this community and get some conversation going about this stuff. So now it's your turn. I want to get kind of an idea of who's in the room and how you chose this session. So how many people are here? It's the first time that they've ever come to a talk about like tech and diversity and stuff. Hands, please. Okay, awesome. How many of it's totally old hat and you're just here for the giggles? Yeah, okay, great. Oh, who thinks they might be a secret tyrant? Anyone? Any benevolent dictators out there? Yes, okay, this room is for you, awesome. So I want to start out with a little exercise. I saw Melissa Harris Lacewell recently gave this great talk. She's a professor and commentator on MSNBC, she's super smart. And she did this little exercise at a talk that she gave, so I want to do that with you now. So when I say the word Google, how many people think of this? If I say Google, yeah, did you thought of that one? Okay. And if I say Twitter, how many people think? Birdie? No, Twitter, yeah, right. If I say Facebook? No, just kidding, Facebook's always been Facebook. And if I say Apple, how many people think of that one or that one? Right. So if you think about this, even 30 years ago, just 30 years ago, this wasn't even a concept on the planet. And we've evolved to a point where it's completely changed the game of technology in so many ways. And it's not even like 30 years ago, people were like, oh, you know, I just don't know any apples that are computers. Or, we asked for some computers and we were hoping to get some apples, but, all they sent were TRS-80s. Oh, well. Well, nerd humor for the old school people in the room. So you see what happens when an entirely new frame comes into play, and it can be a complete game changer. And not just from the actual innovation itself, but from all of the ripples of innovation that come out after that. And things that affect our lives in ways that we've never even dreamed of. But that can only happen if we're two things. If we're open to changing how we think very fundamentally about doing game-changing work, and if we're willing to design systems that inspire innovation, that create serendipity, and support all of the things that make ideas soar. And one of the most important pieces of an intentional systems design schema is that there are lots of different kinds of inputs coming into the system. So this is a lot like DNA. If you get a bunch of the same DNA mixing around the gene pool together, the species mutates poorly and dies off. That's a very bad thing. But if you get a variety of DNA mixing in together, you get a species that strengthens itself as it evolves. And it's absolutely no different with idea generation. So I'm going to be blunt about this, and I'm going to make a very direct statement. This is not about making sure that you have a black person on your panel or a woman on your product team, because that's bean counting and it's relatively useless. What we have to do is break down the barriers that can open our horizons to our work and others' work so that all of us can contribute to this kind of game-changing work, whether that's a service or a product or an entire social movement. But unfortunately, the deck is stacked against us, especially in the world of technology, and this is where the tyranny comes in. Okay, So we have to go back in the Wayback Machine again, and we are going to go back to the late 60s and early 70s to women's lib. Yay! No yay? No yay for that, people? Yes, thank you. Okay. Except not really. Just kidding. Because it wasn't entirely an awesome thing for most people. The wave of second wave feminism, for all the great things that it did do for women, it also marginalized a lot of women's voices, and particularly queer women's voices and women of color's voices. And that wasn't great. So this is how it all went down. And I want to share this with you because I think we can learn a lot from that particular lesson in a really weird way. So one of the things that happened in a lot of women's groups is they decided that they wanted to remove structure from their organizing, that structure was the thing that was oppressing women, and this is what would liberate women, was structure. And so they decided to get rid of their leaders and their hierarchies and all of those things that you can think of as explicit structure. And when you do that, something very kind of insidious happens. And it's insidious because we're not even really aware of the types of things that are going on with us. There's another system that arises, which you can think of as implicit structure. So what do I mean by implicit structure? Well, it starts out with people's personal biases and their worldviews and how they take on the world. And then it also includes things like institutions and kind of structural stratification stuff. The relationships to the culture. And within this group of women who were organizing, what ended up happening is you can think of it kind of like a high school clique, where you don't necessarily have an organized thing that says, okay, you all are now the popular people, you are all the nerds, and that's the way it is. It just sort of evolves over time, and systems of power emerge. And so when that implicit structure takes over, for example, also the idea that the internet is just this big wide open space and that it's all just up by our bootstraps and everything will be awesome. We run the risk of entering this series of vicious cycles that can prevent us from creating fundamental systemic change. By pretending that these biases don't exist or don't matter, we reinforce existing power structures and we replicate the offline world into the online world. So there's this great paper, part of where the name of this talk came from a woman named Jo Friedman in 1970. She wrote this incredibly cool paper called The Tyranny of Structurelessness. Cannot recommend it enough. It's really, really cool. The text is available online. And this was what she said, ultimately, about what happens with structureless organizations. So it means that to strive for a structureless group is as useful and as deceptive as to aim for an objective news story, a value-free social science, or a free economy. A laissez-faire group is about as realistic as a laissez-faire society. The idea becomes a smokescreen for the strong or the lucky to establish unquestioned hegemony over others. Thus, structurelessness becomes a way of masking power. This is really important because of the social stratification that currently exists online. We're already seeing the repercussions of digital structurelessness manifest in many ways. We're taking our understanding of the offline world with all of the good and the bad, and we're projecting that onto this blank canvas that is the internet. And sociologically, it's very understandable, and it's even documented. It's a phenomenon called homophily. Humans will always kind of congregate to people who they think that are like them, but in reality, it can actually be dangerous, physically dangerous. So to show you an example of that, how this is working online, how many people remember a few months ago the launch of Google Buzz and all of the crazy privacy debacles that happened after this, right? How can we forget? Yes? I'm going to need you to nod or shake, people. Nod or shake. Yes, awesome. Okay, so, yeah, how can we forget? There was one particular feature in this privacy debacle that I wanted to share with you, an experience of a young woman online. And it was the one where Google Reader would automatically share items with people who were in your most contacted list in Gmail. There's a young woman that blogs at a site called, I hope I'm saying it right, Fugitivus, because it's Latin. And she put together this really well-known rant on how unbelievably messed up it was, because her most contacted person in her Gmail was her abusive ex-husband. Right. And the people that contacted her most sort of after that, where this is a quote from her, she says, "A minority of people that contact me, but the minority that emails me the most, just thus becoming frequent, are psychotic men who think I deserve to be raped because I keep a blog about how I do not deserve to be raped, and this apparently inspires Hulk rage." So obviously no one that was on the Buzz launch team intentionally designed a system that would do this. And I also don't think that they sat around, bounced around use cases and said, well, you know what, abusers and stalkers, that's a negligible use case, probably doesn't happen that often, let's just ignore it. But what I do think happened is that they had probably a very largely homogenous team, this is a picture of the launch team here, working on a product for whom the idea of something incredibly bad like death happening just didn't occur to them. It wasn't part of their field of experience, and this is what happens when you have homogenous people working on projects. So privilege is a wacky thing. It kind of blinds us. There's a line from an Ani DeFranco song, because yes, I'm totally that girl. Thank you for the few people who know her. Anyway, there's a line from a song where she says, "Privilege is a headache that you don't know that you don't have." We bring all kinds of privilege to the tech table. There's the obvious stuff, like the external stuff, like our gender, our race, or our class. But then there's the underlying ones, the more subtle ones, like how our access to technology has developed our skill sets in a certain way to give us advantages, or how our class status has informed our relationship to technology. We have to be willing as thought leaders to be accountable and to account for our blind spots. And I think part of the reason that people get squeamish when accounting for difference and when it comes to the development of ideas is that there's tension with difference, right? We're not good with tension. It's much easier for us to surround ourselves with people who think like us and who look like us. That process is going to go smoother. But the problem with that is that when you gloss over difference, it doesn't go away, and a lot of times it actually makes it worse. There's a scholar named Roosevelt Thomas who notes that we all make better decisions as individuals and as society when we acknowledge and account for difference and the tension that difference creates. The key point here is that harmony is not the goal if we're going to actually get anywhere. There's a false notion that we have about tension and difference too. We think that it makes us weak. We think that there's this vulnerability around it that will destroy us, that somebody's going to come along and see that chink in our armor and take advantage of us. But the secret here in this kind of work is that vulnerability is actually our secret weapon. And I can tell you from my own experience that any time that I've made myself vulnerable in this kind of situation or any kind of situation related to equity and diversity stuff, I've emerged stronger and more in control of the future of that situation. It's not that I got the crap beat out of me because, it's not one of those like, oh, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger kind of things. It's that what happens is you lay out your cards from the beginning in order to be able to prevent and predict where disaster and failure might occur. It's sort of like the complete opposite of poker, right? So it brings me to think about how we're going to both fight our implicit and explicit tyranny, and it requires us to step up our game in a number of ways. The first thing is that we need to think beyond the word diversity and beyond meaningless phrases like colorblindness that only serve to ignore the obvious. If we're going to have a shot at really, really disrupting the status quo with the technologies that we're working with and developing, we've got to make a few new commitments. So, first one is you need to raise the bar. Since a lot of you are relatively on board with the message, we had the show of hands at the beginning, you guys all get a more advanced homework assignment. It's time to take this to the next level and do some serious evangelizing, to figure out where you have privilege and to make yourself useful. It's just not enough to be well-intentioned. You have to bring more people in from that point of privilege and bring that kind of expertise to this work, because in the big picture, diversity is only the beginning. On its own, diversity doesn't ensure equity. And equity is what's likelier to bring about radical shifts in the landscape than anything else. Equity, for me, is the frame of the future. So the last thing is that you need to make sure that these issues aren't siloed. Or, I'm sorry, it's the second thing. Woo, mama can't count today. All right, so the second thing is to make sure that these issues aren't siloed. One of the most unfortunate things that I see happening right now, every time some big flare-up happens, like, oh, where are the women in tech? You know, like, oh, you know, let's have this discussion every year, you know, that kind of thing, is that all of a sudden these kind of separate but equal spaces pop up in the place, well, let's have that discussion over here at this conference. And that's boo, 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 boo. Like, I understand the need to have a safe space where you can work things out. But ultimately, creating spin-off discussions in those kinds of spaces instead of integrating and providing equity does little to reshape the overall dominant conversation. So we need to commit to what influence you have to inject the values of equity into the work that you do and the conversations that you have. And you need to teach others to do the same. So finally, for real, listen, listen, listen. This is the last thing, I promise. You need to think of yourselves as ambassadors. If you're committed consciously and intentionally to seeking out people who don't think like you and don't act like you, the best defense is not a good offense. And this is a really, really good point. In the work of doing ambassadorship, it's not your job to defend your point on the food chain. It's your job to listen and to adopt the kind of mindset of a diplomat. That's where a lot of people end up getting in trouble, and I know I have in the past. So ultimately, your job is to recognize what privilege you bring to the table, whether it's your gender, your class, your race, your sexuality, whatever it is, and figure out how you best can use it to ensure an equitable future for all of social technologies. Thank you. What time is it? How much time do we have? Oh, you have like 3 minutes. I don't want to make you sit here for 3 minutes unless somebody has some burning question that they want everyone to hear. Oh, here you go. Yes. I'm biased because I'm on the board of this organization, but it's called the Applied Research Center. And they actually have reports, materials, and training for all kinds of stuff about all different kinds of equity, whether it's racial or sexual, you know, or sexuality or gender or whatever it is. Applied Research, and it's just arc.org. Anyone else, as they all run away? Lynn.
Yeah, you say doing like X conference part 2, that idea. So like TED Women.
See, okay, let's talk about TED Women for a second. When I wrote this, I was more thinking about how Arrington like added that talk on to TechCrunch Disrupt. Like, let's not actually like add more women like speakers to, you know, or add more people of color. Let's just have a separate conversation where we talk about the problems of women in tech. TED Women, I had the same problem. I was calling it the Ladies Auxiliary TED. Because that's what it felt like to me. It was like the sewing circle for the women, you know, instead of adding more women or people of color. I don't really know. I went and looked while I was writing this, and they say that it's about the importance of girls and development, and in developing world, developing countries, and that they're going to have men and women speakers, and and that it's not just like this.
It's not a separate.
Yeah, because I had I was just like railing against it, you know. But yeah, I had the same problem with it. But again, like creating a separate conversation, like what Arrington's doing at TechCrunch Disrupt this week, I don't really agree with.
It should be a part of the main conversation.
It should be. I mean, he's saying, like, we tweeted about it back and forth, and he insists that it will absolutely be an awesome conversation and part of like the main thing. But it doesn't seem that way to me. We'll see what happens though when they report back. Any other questions? If you think of something burning later, you can find me at deannazant.com. Again, my handle is randomdeanna, and I didn't put out the postcards, but I have a book, again, that you can buy at a bookstore. It's called Share This, and I like it. It seems nice. So thank you all. Yay.